Om Janani Saradam Deving Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Namaste everyone. This is the occasion of the 125th anniversary of Prabuddha Bharat, and it is a great honor for me that I have been invited to present my article, Maya, a Conceptual History. I'm very thankful to the Advait Ashram for this opportunity. So my subject today is Maya, a Conceptual History. First of all, what is conceptual history? Put simply, it means a history of concepts. You know, concepts are not static entities. They evolve over time. Their meaning evolves over time. One of Swamiji's wishes was that we do a kind of history of Indian terms and concepts, capturing this evolution of meaning of Indian concepts. For example, you know the Sanskrit word dharma. At one point of time, it meant certain specific things. Over time, it accrued other meanings. And right now, we use this word in a completely different sense. Now, there has been a very thriving practice of conceptual history in the West. It is known by different names, and there are also different traditions of doing conceptual history. One is the first generation history of ideas. The major proponent of that was Arthur Lovejoy. Presently, we do intellectual history. And then there's the practice of conceptual history or history of concepts per se, which is of German origin. In the German language, it's called the Begriffsgeschichte. Begriff is idea and Geschichte is concept. One can refer to Reinhard Koselleck's The Practice of Conceptual History. It's a translation of his German work. So coming back to our main subject, what is Maya? The commonly understood meaning of Maya is illusion, as all of us know, but it is not a very accurate meaning. In the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta, which is incomplete without the theory of Maya, Maya means something very specific. It's a specific philosophical term. But Advaita Vedanta was not the first school to use this term. The term predates the school of Advaita Vedanta. It appears for the first time, in fact, in the Rig Veda itself. We'll trace this journey, but before that, let us look at the etymology of Maya. The first root is ma, meaning to measure, miyate anaya iti, that by which is measured. As tradition has it, it means that elusive projection of the world by which the immeasurable Brahman appears as if measured. From the same root, we derive another meaning, to build, leading to the idea of appearance or illusion. And then there is a second meaning to the root ma, to show. Mati svatmanam darshayati iti maya. That which shows itself, that which appears to our view. We see all these meanings embedded in the word Maya, the way we use it even today. Now, the big question in the history of ideas is the question of change and continuity. How much do concepts change in their meaning, and to what extent do they remain the same? In the context of Maya, with respect to Maya, the question would be, does the Maya of the Vedas mean the same thing as it came to mean in the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta? We shall see. Before that, a brief timeline. The Vedas, we know that it's the oldest record of humankind in the entire world, and it cannot be dated. I mean, historians, scholars try to date it, but I personally feel it's better to maintain that it cannot be dated because there's no evidence which can suggest a plausible date for the Vedas. The Vedas were one corpus of literature which were later divided into 4 parts, and the oldest part became the Rig Veda. Then we have the Yajur and Sama Veda, and the latest portion is the Atharva Veda. And even within each Veda, we have the Samhita part, which is the oldest part of that particular Veda, then the Aranyaks, Brahmanas, Upanishads, like that. So the Upanishads, which also cannot be dated, I believe, are the last and the youngest portion of the Vedas, the last portion of the Vedas. That is why they are known as Vedanta. Among the Upanishads, we have Chandogya and Brihadaranyaka, which are the older Upanishads. We'll see that the word Maya appears in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And then we have the other principal Upanishads, among which use of the word Maya was very significant in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. This Upanishad is the first watershed in the history of the concept of Maya, because in this Upanishad, the concept solidifies. There is a kind of consolidation of meaning. And then Maya, we find Maya even in the later and minor Upanishads. Then we come to the Bhagavad Gita. Once again, the question of date. I mean, it's the most vexing question in the history of ancient Indian thought. You know, we can never arrive at an accurate date, but generally scholars say date it to the 2nd century BC. The composition of the Bhagavad Gita, I'm talking about the writing of the Bhagavad Gita, 2nd century BC or earlier. We find Maya there, a very significant verse. Then Gaurapad, the first systematic philosopher of the school of Advaita Vedanta, 6th century AD, teacher of Adi Shankara's teacher Govindapad. So Gaurapad is kind of the Paramaguru of Adi Shankara, and his famous work is Mandukya Karika, which is his commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad. Then we have Adi Shankara, 8th century AD, the second watershed in the history of the concept of Maya. This is the final form that the doctrine of Maya, Mayavad, would take. Then we have post-Shankara Advaita Vedanta philosophers, mainly his students and also others later, who also debate on the nature of Maya. So this is our timeline. Now we see Maya in the Vedas. In the Rig Veda, the word including simple and compound forms, and these are usually addressed to different devas. But of these 75 hymns, 35 times to Indra alone. So that's quite significant. Now, what is the predominant meaning of Maya in the Vedas? Actually, in the Vedic period, especially in the Rig Vedic period, which is the early Vedic period, the word Maya was a polysemous term, which means that it had several meanings. So one could not always extract the correct meaning from the context. There was a kind of ambiguity, often, and it was used in different meanings. At times, meanings converged. So the first predominant meaning in which the word was used in the Rig Veda is pragya, which literally means knowledge or intelligence, but it was used in the sense of power. And usually it meant a mysterious power, not ordinary power. And the second predominant meaning was kapata, deception. At times these two meanings merged, at times they didn't. So kapata and pragya, deception and power, were not necessarily always together. In the Rig Veda, the word is used often in connection with the marvels of nature. You know, how does the day happen? How does the sun rise? How does rain happen? So all wondrous things. It is not the power of ordinary men. It is a kind of incomprehensible ability. You cannot explain it. What it can produce is at times incredible. So there is an element of unreality to what Maya can produce. You know, these are all elements that were already there, present in the Rig Veda. We still associate the term with these dimensions. Then the word was also often used in connection with a god's ability to transform his form. We know that later, we'll see that later it's used in the Upanishads. The Lord transforms his form into this world by virtue of his Maya. We'll come to that. Before that, Yajur Veda and Samveda, we don't find the word appear so often. In the Atharva Veda, it appears only 20 times, but the meaning gets fixed in the Atharva Veda. The usage in the Atharva Veda is very important because it is almost always used in the sense of power, a mysterious or magical power. So there was an ambiguity in the Rig Veda. In the Atharva Veda, the ambiguity is no longer there. It is invariably used in the sense of a mysterious or magical power. And in the Atharva Veda, it comes increasingly to be associated with the Asuras. You know, it's a power of the Asuras, but not necessarily an evil power. The Jainmanya Brahmana narrates the story of two Asuras who possessed such great Maya that they were able to cook rice on non-fire. That is something impossible. cooking something on non-fire. But that is what Maya enables somebody to do. In the Shatabata Brahmana, Maya stands for a kind of wondrous power. Here Shayana explains Maya as Aghatita Ghatana Shakti, the power that can make the impossible possible. It's important to draw our attention to the fact that this qualification of Maya as Aghatita Ghatana Shakti is retained in the later Advaita Vedanta, and it's even retained in our contemporary times. Srimad Totapuri explained Maya to Sri Ramakrishna as Aghatana Ghatana Patiyasi. So that being, usually it's actually female, it's feminine, that being who is expert at making the impossible possible. Aghatana Ghatana Patiyasi. That is how Srimad Totapuri explained Maya to Sri Ramakrishna. You can find the reference in the Leela Prasanga. Coming to Maya in the Upanishads, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad clearly states that the Lord on account of his Maya is perceived as manifold. So it's a kind of continuity of meaning in the sense, see, the Devas in the Rig Veda could transform their form by virtue of Maya. Now, in the Upanishads, we are coming to the great Lord, the Brahman. So that can transform its form, like we perceive it as manifold on account of its Maya. And Maya is the power of the Lord. That's what we'll find in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. A brief interlude, in the Prashna Upanishad, the Brahma Loka is meant for those who are without crookedness, falsehood and Maya. Here Maya means deception. So we see a kind of coexistence of meanings. I mean, Maya has become something very specific, something by virtue of which the Lord is perceived as manifold in the Brihadaranyaka. In the Prashna Upanishad, the word Maya is used also to mean deception. So we still see a coexistence of meanings in that tier, in that layer of text. And then we come to the Shvetashvatara, the famous verse, the ruler of Maya projects this world, and because of Maya, it becomes bound in it as a separate entity, as it were. One should know that Prakriti is surely Maya, and the Supreme Lord is the ruler of Maya. Mayam tu Prakritim Vidyat, Mayinam tu Maheshwaram. So Maya is the power of the Lord. It is by virtue of Maya that the Lord projects this world, and he appears as a separate entity. So all these elements, incredibility, impossibility, magical element, and the element of power, all these are present here. These meanings are embedded. Then in the later Upanishads, the Nrisingha Tapaniya Upanishad says that Maya is the power of Nrisingha. It's the same thing as saying that Maya is the power of the Lord. Maya in the Bhagavad Gita. Here too we see that Maya is the power of the Lord. Krishna, although he is beyond birth and death, he assumes a human birth through his Maya. And his Maya, which is his power, is divine. And only those who take refuge in him can cross over this Maya. And we have that famous verse once again in the 18th chapter. The Lord dwells in the hearts of all beings, O Arjuna, and by the Lord's Maya causes them to revolve as though mounted on a machine. Ishvara sarva bhutanam riddeshet janatishtati, bhramayan sarva bhutani yantra rudhani mayaya. Now Maya in the Advaita Vedanta. One of the major debates regarding Gaurapad is that whether he was a Buddhist or not. Well, he was not. But he was definitely influenced by Buddhism, because this period, this intervening period between the Gita and the development of the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta is witness to the rise of the Madhyamaka philosophy in Buddhism. I'll discuss that at the end. So Gaurapad obviously is influenced by Buddhist ideas and terminology, but he is in a dialogic relationship with Buddhism. He's in dialogue with Buddhism. He's trying to respond to their critique of Advaita Vedanta. So naturally he borrows some terminology and senses, but he's a pakka 100% Advaita Vedantin, not a Buddhist, because he believes in the Atman, he believes in Brahman. Buddhists do not. So in Gaurapad's Mandukya Karika, we see that he is using Maya in the sense of dream or magic. This is the same sense in which it's used in, the word Maya is used in Buddhism as well. But for a Vedantin, Maya is something more. Maya is the beginningless cosmic illusion, Anadi Maya. And it is because of Maya that the non-dual reality is perceived as dual. Maya matram idam dvaitam advaitam paramarthata. This idea you won't find in Buddhism. The self-effulgent self imagines itself through itself by the power of its own Maya. Gaudapad is the first Vedantin to formulate a doctrine of Maya, but that's not the final form. The final form comes with Shankara. In his Vivek Churamani, he often equates avidya and Maya. So he describes avidya or Maya as Paramesha Shakti, the power of the Lord. It is Anadi and it is Trigunatmika. It is beginningless and it consists of the three gunas, Sattva, Raja and Tama. Maya can only be inferred from the effect it produces. Otherwise, you cannot actually prove the existence of Maya. It is neither existent nor non-existent nor both. I'll come back to this. And it is anirvachaniya rupa, indescribable. One cannot describe Maya, one cannot explain the mechanism of Maya. Post-Shankara Advaitins debate mainly whether Maya and Avidya are really the same. What is the locus of Avidya? Some say it's the Jiva, some say it's the Brahman. Mandana Mishra developed further Shankara's description of Maya as indescribable. He says that precisely because Maya is neither real, sati, nor absolutely unreal, atyantam asati. That's precisely why it's indescribable, because how do you describe it then? Swamiji gives a very beautiful explanation of this neither existent nor non-existent quality of Maya in one of his letters. For those who are interested, you can see the letter to E.T. Study, dated 13 February 1896. He gives the analogy of the wave and the ocean. And he says that the wave is the name and the form. When the wave subsides, it's the wave as name and the form subsides, but the wave as water remains. So the wave as water is eternally separate, it's independent. It's independent of the name and the form. Whereas the name and the form cannot be separated from the wave. They don't have a separate existence. That is why they can never be said to exist. But at the same time, they are not zero. So here we get this idea that it is neither existent nor non-existent. This is called Maya. Now at the end of it, what is Maya? Swamiji himself traces the history of the concept of Maya in his lecture, The Maya and Illusion. It was given in London in October 1896. He says that the word first appears in the Rig Veda, in the Vedas. There it means deception, then the word disappears for a while, then it appears again, and then it solidifies in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, where Maya is the power of the Lord. Then again, the next watershed, he traces Shankara. In between, there is the intervention of the Buddhist philosophers, through whom we get this idea that Maya is illusion. Because for the Buddhists, they did not have a systematic philosophy of Maya. They just used the word Maya to mean magic or mirage or something like that, which means that the unreality of the world. So Swamiji says that it's coming through this Buddhistic mediation that we arrive at this meaning of Maya as complete illusion, you know. But that's not technically true. That's not what it is meant in Advaita Vedanta. So he says that the Maya of the Vedanta in its last developed form is neither idealism nor realism, nor is it a theory. It is a simple statement of facts, what we are and what we see around us. If one could recall that dialogue from the film The Matrix, you know, the dialogue between Morpheus and Neo, Morpheus explains what the Matrix is. It's the world that has been pulled on our eyes to cover the truth. That the truth in that film was different. The truth here for Advaita Vedanta is that the world is Brahman. But so it's the world that has been pulled on our eyes to cover the truth. Now, what do we see in the history of the concept? You know, we have these two concepts of diachronicity and synchronicity. The diachronic axis is development over time, you know, the historical development. Rig Veda, then Atharva Veda, then the Upanishads, then the Gita. And the synchronicity is the different meanings that can exist at a particular point of time. So we see that during the Vedic period, it was already a polysemous term. It was used in different senses: power, deception. Yes, young woman was a marginal meaning of the word Maya, but that is unconnected to the meanings power and deception. So at that point of time, at that same point of time, different meanings coexisted. So it was a polysemous term. Then we see the diachronic history of the word. We'll see that, the elements or the different dimensions that we associate with the word Maya were present since the very beginning. Maya has power, Maya has a magical dimension, it has an incomprehensible dimension. All these elements were there, even from the Rig Veda itself. But there was no systematic philosophy of Maya. There was no systematic doctrine of Maya. Philosophy is something very systematic when you develop it systematically. That systematic philosophical treatment of Maya was not there. There was no Mayavad. But certainly the concept existed with the same set of meanings. And we can see that the idea is evolving gradually from the power of the Devas through the power of the Asuras to the power of the Lord, by which he projects this world. And again, synchronicity in between, you have Maya being used as deception in the Prashna Upanishad. That's a synchronic axis. So from Brihadaranyaka, Shvetashvatara, then Bhagavad Gita, they are more or less saying the same thing in different ways. And then we finally come to its final form in Shankara, who develops it into a systematic philosophy. Thank you. I have a set of questions with me. So the first question I have is, in your article, you focus on one tradition in particular, Advaita Vedanta, and its evolution of the concept of Maya. Can you discuss how non-Advaitic schools of Vedanta like Vishishtadvaita, Advaita, Shuddhadvaita, Bhedaved, Achintya Bhedaved have understood Maya? Okay, let me tell you about the Vishishtadvaitic position about Maya. Before that, just a few details about this tradition. While Advaita Vedanta believes in the absolute identity of Brahman and Atman, Vishishta Advaita does not. Its most famous propounder is Ramanuj between 11th and 12th century AD. He proposes the philosophy of non-dualism qualified by difference. To put it simply, he believes that God is the whole and we are the parts. As parts, we are inseparable from God, but we are still a little bit different. We are not the whole, right? So now what is the Vishishtadvaitic position regarding Maya? Ramanuja absolutely refutes this doctrine of Mayavad put forward by the Advaitins. He offers sevenfold objections to Mayavad. This is famously known as his Saptavidha Anupapatti. I'll just briefly mention, what are his 7 objections. The first is Ashraya Anupapatti. Brahman cannot be the substratum of avidya. He's actually responding more in the context of avidya, but since Advaita Vedanta often equates Maya and avidya, we have to take it as together, meaning Maya avidya. Ashraya Anupapatti, Brahman cannot be the substratum of avidya. The second is Tirodhana Anupapatti. Concealment of Brahman is not possible. Third, Swarupa Anupapatti, avidya cannot be real. Fourth, Anirvachanya Anupapatti, avidya is not inexplicable. Fifth, Pramana Anupapatti, there is no Pramana to prove the existence of Maya. Sixth, Nivartaka Anupapatti, Shruti texts cited in support of removing avidya are not so. And seventh, Nivritya Anupapatti, avidya cannot be completely removed by mere knowledge. So this is the Vishishtadvaitic position vis-a-vis Maya. The second question I have is, when did Maya get associated with the feminine? Well, since the very beginning. Since the very beginning, Maya was feminine. The third question is, you refer to Buddhism. Can you discuss the concept of Maya and Buddhism? Yes, as I said, that the Buddhist Madhyamika philosopher Nagarjuna between 2nd and 3rd century AD, he used the word Maya to mean magic, mirage, illusion, froth, flash of lightning, because for them the world is unreal. There's no objective reality to the world. So the world is Maya, and when he uses the word world is Maya, he means that the world is like magic, like a mirage, like a flash of lightning, here now, gone the next moment, like froth. We see it now, we don't see it the next moment. My next question, what does Sri Ramakrishna say about Maya? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that he distinguishes between Vidya Maya and Avidya Maya. I have not come across these expressions elsewhere apart from the Kathamrit. So Vidya Maya are all the good qualities, the sattvic qualities that can lead you to God. And Avidya Maya are all the negative qualities that will take you away from God. We know the story of the three dacoits. Sattva Guna was also a dacoit. I mean, Sattva Guna cannot take you to God, but Sattva Guna can take you up to that path which will lead to God. So Vidya Maya is like that. He says now that in the world, I mean, a wife can Vidya Maya or an Avidya, either a Vidya Maya or an Avidya Maya. It depends. Vidya Maya assists you to cross over Maya. The second thing that comes to my mind is that he distinguishes between Maya and Daya. When we feel affection or love or concern only for our, family members or kin, it is Maya, it is attachment. But when we feel universal love, concern for everybody, love for everybody, it is Daya, compassion. The third thing that comes to my mind is that Maya is like this veil, like, the scum on the surface of a pond. When suddenly you can remove the scum with your hand, you have a glimpse of reality. Then again, the scum comes back. So it's like at times that veil is lifted, and like a flash, you see reality. Then again, that veil is drawn. He also says that when recognized, Maya is embarrassed, so she runs away. Maya ke chinte parle Maya paliye jay. So she's like a thief. If when caught red-handed, she will run away. That is why he says that we should address her as mother, because then she is embarrassed. She can no longer cast her spell. That is why he says that we should take refuge at the feet of Mahamaya. Now, this journey from Maya to Mahamaya is another story. I don't think I can discuss it here today. But then Mahamaya, the universal mother, is the great Maya. When we take refuge at the feet of Mahamaya, Sharanagati, then Maya cannot harm us. This imagery of Kali standing on Shiva, Shiva represents self-knowledge. And Mahamaya is obstructing the way. Jotoi ja koro, Mahamaya poth chhere na dile kichu hobe na. Holy Mother's words. Mahamaya is obstructing the way. She doesn't let knowledge rise. So when she is pleased because we have taken refuge in her, she stands aside and makes way for knowledge to dawn upon us. That is why Sri Ramakrishna emphasized so much on the motherhood of God, especially for this age. So my last question is, we have been presented with the conceptual history of Maya. What is the practical significance of this talk to our daily lives? Do you find that we as householders tend to misunderstand or misapply the concept of Maya in our daily lives? Misapply in the sense that we often invoke Maya when we do not wish to put in our sincere efforts into something. Yes, we do that, and that's tamasic. That's absolutely a tamasic tendency or quality. It is out of weakness and laziness that we do so, not out of true knowledge. It's not that we have gained this true knowledge that the world is Maya. Because we need to see our behavior on other occasions. If we really had jnana, we would not be grieving either, isn't it? We would pass off the death of near and dear ones as Maya, but can we do that? We can't. It's difficult, very, very difficult to accept death. It's human. When Muni Mohan Mullik lost his son, Sri Ramakrishna said that it's really painful to lose one's own child to death, because the child is born out of your own body, But then Sri Ramakrishna could really console Muni ultimately, because Sri Ramakrishna had true knowledge. Since he had realized God, he had the power to divert Muni's mind. Even in the midst of such tremendous grief, Sri Ramakrishna could divert Muni's mind towards God, the ultimate reality and the only thing that is permanent in this world. And Mani Mohan became a bit more peaceful. So knowledge doesn't mean knowing that everything is Maya. Knowledge is knowing that we and everybody else around us is Atman. Knowledge is knowing that God is the only permanent and ultimate reality. Maya, to my mind, is just a negative conceptual prop unless Maya develops into the concept of Mahamaya, that is the universal mother. Just Maya by itself, the doctrine of Maya is just a negative conceptual prop used by philosophers to explain the manifold manifestation of the one without a second Brahman. But knowledge is something positive. It is knowing that in essence we are the immortal, immutable Atman that knows no grave and no death. Thank you.